Beneath the biggest stadium ever constructed, you are imprisoned in a stone cell. 50,000 Romans observed you from above. Spouse lost his life while battling a lion. The throng is dispersing. The lights are fading. Then you hear heavy, methodical footsteps approaching. Your entryway is filled with a shadow. The gladiator is the one who made it out of today's slaughter. He has gnawn his own blood all over him. Your cell is unlocked by a guard. The gladiator gestures towards you. This is not a scene from a scary film. In the Roman Empire, this was Tuesday. The portion of Roman history that is not taught in schools is what I'm going to show you. The organized, state-sponsored nightmare that transpired upon the return of the multitudes. This isn't conjecture. Roman authors themselves have written about it. Additionally, the proof is really engraved into the walls beneath the Colosseum. You will never have the same perspective on ancient Rome if you stay to the very end. For decades, Hollywood has been deceiving you about gladiators. Spartacus the Gladiator. These films depict the violence and bloodshed, the honor and defiance. They don't show you what transpired in the hours following the conclusion of the games, when the public spectacle turned into something much darker. I'm referring to a system that was so unsettling that contemporary historians coined a new Latin phrase to explain it. The carnal victory is Victoria Carnalis. The Romans, however, never gave it that name since they didn't think it was noteworthy enough to require one. It was simply typical. What we know for sure is as follows. Roman authors like Martial, Juvenal, and Seneca described a society in which captured women were stored beneath arenas and given away as rewards. Gave away like rations to gladiators who did well, not figuratively. The Roman authorities ran this system with the same level of bureaucratic efficiency that they employed to construct roads and aqueducts. Consider that. The industrialization of sexual assault was developed by the same civilization that brought us representative and tangible governance. I need you to accomplish something before we delve further. Take a look at the like button now. Please click that button and leave a comment letting me know where you are watching from if you think that buried history should be revealed, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Because Rome isn't the only character in this tale. It's about what empires do when no one's looking. Let's go down into the hypergym now. You must first comprehend how Rome turned people into inventory in order to comprehend what transpired in those basement cells. This was not arbitrary cruelty. This was an industrialist form of systematic dehumanization. And it began as soon as Roman armies took over new lands. Rome did more than simply win a battle when they put an end to an uprising in Gaul or destroyed a city in Judea. They handled the whole populace. It resembled an industrial assembly line where men of military age were dispatched to die in arenas or mines. Children were sold to slave markets all over the empire. Women were declared as state-owned captiva war prizes. This is where things start to become really cold. These individuals were no longer considered human under Roman law. They were categorized as property of the rest. The same legal classification as cattle or furnishings. A lady who was subjugated had the same rights as a chair. It wasn't even legally illegal to do anything to her, because it is impossible to commit a crime against a thing. However, Rome did more than merely use the law to dehumanize its citizens. They used spectacle to dehumanize them. There was more to the games than just amusement. They were political plays intended to psychologically subjugate Rome's own populace as well as the conquerors. You were seeing more than just a man's death when you saw a captured Germanic chieftain battle a lion. Rome was demonstrating to you what happens to those who rebel against the empire. And things became genuinely sadistic during the midday break, when the elite departed for lunch. These deadly charades, in which condemned captives were made to act out well-known tales while the deaths were actual, are referred to by historians as mythical reenactments. These sights are described with unsettling casualness by the poet Martial, who wrote in the 1st century AD, as if he were evaluating a restaurant that he describes a prisoner dressed as the fabled musician Orpheus, whose melody could enchant any creature. They took him into the arena while a bear was let loose by a lyre. Martial observes that the bear killed the man while 50,000 people were eating honey dates, and he is almost sorry that the music didn't work this time. In another section, Marshall tells the story of a lady who is compelled to reenact the myth of Pasiphae who mated with a sacred bull. I warn you, this is quite unsettling. For this prisoner, it meant that an animal would publicly attack her in front of thousands of onlookers until she passed away from her wounds. Go back and read that. The Roman government established a system in which animals would rape and kill people as lunchtime entertainment. This was not an insane emperor's deranged fantasy. This was routine operating procedure for decades. Children were brought by senators to observe. The city's walls were decorated with advertisements for the activities. Snacks were sold by vendors. Marshall himself observes that the arena gives reality to whatever myth tells us. This is what should frighten you, though. This is a compliment from him. He is complimenting the system's effectiveness. This was the setting, this industrialist, merciless bureaucratic apparatus that also processed subjugated women into the gladiators' incentive system. Let's now discuss the men who were given these honors. Rome never really reconciled the strange contradiction that gladiators existed in. As slaves with less legal standing than a dog, they were both the lowest and highest members of society. But famous people whose names were scrawled on walls by devoted admirers and whose images were depicted on mosaics. The aristocratic women were enamored with them. One gladiator is referred to as the sigh of the girls in ancient Pompeii graffiti, while another is called the glory of the ladies. Noble women have been known to sneak into gladiator camps and bribe guards for clandestine meetings. Sergius, the gladiator, reportedly had affairs with several married patrician women, which led to massive controversies. Their bodily fluids were turned into commodities, which was even crazier. After battles, gladiator perspiration was gathered, combined with olive oil, and marketed as an aphrodisiac and cosmetic. Consider that degree of adoration for celebrities. The sweat of these enslaved men is bottled and sold to the upper classes. However, Rome was always afraid of these soldiers. The Spartacus rebellion, which took place in 73 BC, was deeply ingrained in Roman culture. Rome was on the verge of collapse after 78 gladiators managed to flee and amass an army of 70,000. They humiliated legion after legion for 2 years. 6,000 of the survivors were crucified along the Ion route when Rome eventually defeated them. For 200 kilometers, one body every 40 meters. From Rome to Capua, there is a forest of crosses. The Roman mentality was never fully recovered from the catastrophe. Every time a gladiator raised a blade, every lanista who oversaw a gladiator school, and every spectator in the stadium recalled that these men had once come dangerously near to destroying Rome. So how do you deal with extremely important and deadly soldiers who have justifiable grievances and the fighting prowess to address them? You employ a mix of measured rewards and severe punishment. Extra food rations, cash prizes, and freedom following a sufficient number of wins. However, the sources allude to a different, more basic idea. Access to ladies who have been conquered. This documentation is annoyingly dispersed. Roman authors make brief reference to it as though it's too clear to go into great depth about. However, a pattern becomes apparent when you combine references from Martial, Juvenile, and later sources. Gladiators who lived and fought well were rewarded with what ancient texts obliquely describe too as the victor's rights following an especially spectacular victory, especially at the major games sponsored by the emperor or wealthy senators. This frequently meant access to female captives housed under the arena, according to contemporary historians who read between the lines and cross-reference with our understanding of military awards and slave management. It seems that the procedure was terribly bureaucratic. The hypergym, the enormous subterranean network beneath the arena floor, would be where the gladiator would be taken. Still coated in the arena's blood and sand, he was still in his armor. An escort would be a ludus official or an arena administrator. Before arriving to a particular area of holding cells, they would pass through oil-lit tunnels, animal cages, and mechanical lifts. These weren't typical jail cells. Small chambers with unique characteristics can be found beneath the Colosseum itself, according to archaeological evidence from several amphitheaters throughout the empire, including Capua and Pompeii. Stone benches, iron rings fastened into walls at waist height and near the floor, doors that lock from the outside. Chains that are permanently affixed to the construction can be seen in certain spaces. The women detained in these cells were referred to as condemned war prisoners or captive idemnati. They had already gone through Rome's conquest bureaucracy. Officials known as a commentator kept track of state property and entered their names in ledgers. Based on her place of origin, each lady was given a number and a category: Parthica, Britannica, and Germanica. A row of cells would be displayed to the gladiator. According to some versions, he had a choice. Others suggest that women were only assigned, like to a warehouse's equipment being checked out. In either scenario, a guard would unlock the assigned cell, the gladiator would enter, or the woman would be brought out, and the door would be locked once more. The surviving sources don't go into much detail about what happened next, although it doesn't require much creativity. The narrative is conveyed through the building. The messages won't. This is what makes it particularly ominous. It wasn't illegal. The majority of Romans didn't even think it was morally dubious. This was included in the game's operating budget. The same administrators who planned animal fights and maintained arena equipment were also in charge of Victoria Carnalis logistics. From the state's point of view, this method skillfully resolved a number of issues. It gave devoted gladiators inexpensive rewards. Since seized women were already considered war booty, the state incurred no costs. Without truly granting him any independence or authority, it strengthened the gladiator's sense of privilege and power. Additionally, it conveyed a message to the subjugated people as well as the gladiator. This is the definition of Roman domination. You have the same rights as the emperor, who has total authority over the conquered, if you win in the arena. It was said bluntly by a Roman author whose name has been lost but whose writings have been cited by successive historians. In the same way that the empire claims its territories by right of conquest, the victor claims his prize. The archaeology is damning, so let's discuss the actual locations where this occurred. The amazing engineering of the lift systems that raised animals to arena level piqued the interest of archaeologists when they first dug beneath the Colosseum in the 19th century. The intricate tunnels used to transport equipment and people. However, as the excavations went on, they discovered something unexpected. Specialized rooms with no clear logistical function. These rooms are usually between 10 and 15 square meters in size. They are situated in a different area of the hypergee from the gladiator-ready rooms and animal cages. What unnerves contemporary archaeologists are their unique characteristics. The walls are lined with stone benches. However, unlike the benches in other rooms, these are constructed at a particular height. At various heights, iron rings are fastened to the walls. Some are at waist height, some are at floor level, and some are higher. The doors latch from the outside and are made of sturdy, iron-reinforced wood. There is evidence of scraping on the walls in various compartments. Desperate fingernails attempting to pierce the thick stone. Beneath large amphitheaters were apartments for people waiting to use them, according to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, who wrote in the 3rd century AD. Although the wording is purposefully ambiguous, he is talking to the game's logistics, particularly the administration of human resources. Graffiti, however, provides the most unsettling evidence. Archaeologists discovered scratch marks on cell walls in the hypergym beneath the amphitheater in Capua, the same city where Spartacus began his uprising. Some are in Latin, while others are in languages spoken throughout the empire. A handful are readable, but the majority are incomplete. I was Amelia of the Bgantes, I saw my children killed, now I am nothing, is the approximate translation of one written in bad Latin by someone who was obviously not a native speaker. The translation of another, which seems to be Celtic, is, "To any god who listens, let me die before tomorrow." These are not the voices that history usually keeps alive. Roman chronicles record military triumphs, architectural accomplishments, and the names of emperors and generals. The stones recall, but they do not list the names of conquered women listed as property. We learn an important lesson from the architecture itself. This approach was created with efficiency and repeatability in mind. These weren't makeshift attack sites. They were well-maintained, purpose-built buildings with particular architectural elements intended to support the activities that took place within. When you compare this to other parts of gladiatorial administration in Rome, the pattern becomes evident. Every aspect of the arena's infrastructure, including gladiator dormitories, animal amenities, and weapon storage, was meticulously designed and uniform throughout the empire. The captive chambers follow the same design. This infrastructure for systematic abuse was funded by the state. Some historians contend that we shouldn't read too much into these rooms because they might have had a variety of functions and that we are projecting contemporary issues onto unclear evidence. However, the picture becomes painfully obvious when you combine the building with the literary allusions, the Roman military cultural pattern, and fundamental reasoning about how the system operated. The most difficult aspect of this tale must now be faced. What this means for the women who were ensnared in this system. Their unique experiences are hardly mentioned in history. We don't keep journals. There is no testimony available. We have property inventories that describe them like cattle and ledgers that list them as numbers. About 20 years old, a healthy German woman was assigned to the Colosseum. However, our knowledge of the conquest process allows us to rebuild the nightmare. These women weren't just any inmates. They originated from particular situations of severe stress. The aftermath of Rome's conquest of an area that rebelled, such as during the Dian Wars or the put-down of Boudicca's Britannic uprising, was meticulous. Roman military protocol required that the civilian populace be handled following the decisive battle. Fighting-age men were either murdered or sold into slavery to perform harsh labor. Youngsters under a specific age were split up and sold to slave markets in the East, where they would never again see their relatives or homes. Women who were of childbearing age were taken to detention centers in chains after being declared captives. The trip to the arena was already a plunge through several circles of hell for a woman in this circumstance. You had witnessed the burning of your village. You had witnessed your kids wailing as they were ripped from your arms. You had marched hundreds of miles to Rome while shackled to numerous other ladies. You were undressed, inspected like cattle, given a number, and imprisoned in a cell beneath the largest monument to the civilization that obliterated everything you know. The waiting was pain in and of itself. Everything was audible to you. People you may recognize were performing in inventive ways to amuse the crowd above. The cries of animals being killed. The applause following a gladiator's very well-executed fatal strike. You also knew that you would never go. Neither a ransom system nor a prisoner exchange existed. Rome refused to engage in negotiations with the conquered. Even if they survived, your family back home would never find out what happened to you. You would just vanish into the empire's machinery. Then there were footsteps. The cell door opens, a decision is made, the door closes and locks once more, and you find yourself on the wrong side of a man who just killed people for amusement in the afternoon. There was no protection under Roman law. Legally, you weren't a person, therefore you couldn't appeal to magistrates. You couldn't even commit suicide, which was one of the few escapes that Roman culture occasionally respected. If you did, you would be depriving the state of its property, and your body would still be utilized in a different way. On a civilizational level, this was psychological warfare. Roman military strategy did not result in the humiliation of conquered women. It was a calculated tactic. The intention was to completely eradicate the spirit of resistance so that future generations wouldn't even consider opposing Rome. This is made clear in ancient writings. According to the historian Josephus, the Romans purposefully took Jewish women to be divided among the legions and the games after putting an end to the Jewish uprising in 70 AD in order to show the survivors that they had lost both their sovereignty and their capacity to defend their families. It was an obvious message. This is what happens to your daughters if you resist Rome. However, this technology occasionally malfunctioned in unanticipated ways. Rome was fixated on upholding certain myths about itself despite its industrialist brutality. The empire believed that it was bringing order and civilization to the barbaric world. Some tragedies have to stay hidden in order to maintain this self-image. This leads us to an incident that made the system uncomfortably visible. Female gladiators. Women battled in the arena proper on incredibly rare occasions. There is disagreement among ancient texts on the identities of these women. Some were obviously forced to fight as slaves, but others seem to have been aristocratic ladies who viewed the arena as a strange form of renown and power in a society that granted women very little control. The aristocracy of Rome were scandalized by the very existence of gladiatrices. What sense of shame can be found in a woman who wears a helmet? The saddest adolescent wrote with dripping contempt about aristocratic women who trained with gladiator weapons. Emperor Septimius visited games at Antioch in 200 AD that included female warriors. The historian Cassius Dio, who was there, claims that an unexpected event occurred. The Greek audience responded to the bouts with discomfort and shock, treating them as seriously as they would have male gladiators. However, the Roman onlookers jeered, made lewd remarks, and regarded the whole thing like a vulgar comedy. The female combatants were not viewed as warriors. Unintentionally positioned in a location intended for death fight, they were perceived as a sexual show. According to reports, Caesar was embarrassed by how cruelly his fellow Romans responded rather than by the actual violence. The audience's incapacity to distinguish between violence and sex when women were involved was undermining the dignity of the games, his propaganda instrument. Thus, he completely prohibited women from competing in the arena. Consider what this indicates. Preventing violence against women was not the issue. Beneath this arena, female captives were still being housed in chambers. The issue was that Rome's self-image was uncomfortable due to the violence's excessive visibility and publicity. The mistreatment was acceptable to the monarch. All he wanted was for it to take place in the shadows, where it belonged. Even after Cyrus was banned, the harassment continued. It just went back to operating mostly in the dark of the hypergym. Anyway, here's what should truly upset you. There was no moral awakening at the conclusion of this system. Even after Rome formally converted to Christianity in the 4th century AD, the games persisted for centuries. The gladiatorial contests continued for many years. The final known gladiatorial fight took place in 404 AD when a monk by the name of Telemachus leaped into the arena to break up a fight and was ripped to pieces by the enraged spectators. Emperor Honorius didn't outlaw gladiatorial fighting for good until after that. However, the system of confinement beneath the arenas persisted despite this. The infrastructure was still in place. Throughout the Byzantine era, capturing war prisoners was a common military practice. Eventually, the system declined due to the fall of the Roman Empire rather than moral advancements. The conquest machinery came to a halt. As a result, the captive supply ran out. Instead than evolving ethically, the institution's demise was caused by a lack of funding. Today, visitors to the Colosseum marvel at the engineering of antiquity while taking pictures in front of the beautiful arches. Tour guides discuss animal hunts and gladiatorial fights. The majority never discuss what transpired in the rooms below. The stones remain in place. The rings that were fastened to the walls have not corroded. Under generations of dust, the scratches left by desperate fingernails are still visible. Anyone who wishes to read them can access the ledgers that listed people as inventory items, which are kept in Vatican archives and museums around Europe. We are not discussing a few isolated occurrences. This was the rule. This was the infrastructure. This was typical. The Colosseum is a testament to the true meaning of empire. The industrialist evil necessary to uphold absolute authority is just as important as the magnificent architectural and military triumphs we commemorate. Every stone in that arena was purchased with more than just cash. It was purchased with lives that were purposefully taken in the most methodical manner that people have ever thought of. Rome wanted you to see more than just the spectacle on the sand. The other half took place in those rooms under your feet in the seconds that followed the boom of the throng turning into quiet. If you're ready to listen, you may still hear those voices, the ones that Roman chroniclers didn't think were worth preserving and that weren't meant to be kept. Additionally, they don't teach that tale in history classes. Click the subscribe button and enable notifications if this revealed something you were unaware of, as we will continue to reveal the past they attempted to conceal. Let me know what you think in a comment, and I'll see you in the next exploration of the darkest recesses of history.